I want to tell you the story of my friend on his behalf. So, this happened 8 years ago. The worst thing in my life happened, the loss of a loved one. My father died. To say that I was grieving is to say nothing. He loved me more than other children, that is, more than my brothers and sisters. I remember how I didn't believe it when my brother came in and announced my father's death, and how I cried bitterly when his coffin stood in the apartment on the third day, when we went to the cemetery. Yes, that's when my grief was replaced by interest in the strange and frightening events around me. The father was lowered into the grave on cables. I could not look at it, and amid the noise and crying of my relatives, I disappeared among the grave monuments. Heartbroken, I went, I don't know where. At one point I felt that my legs were carrying me somewhere. Soon I found myself at a dilapidated, moss-covered monument. The grave itself was decorated not with flowers but with yellow dry grass. It was autumn. The name on the monument was Mikhail Yuryevich Flortsev. There was no photograph, but judging by the white oval silhouette on the monument, she was clearly there. But that's not what's important. Suddenly, I instinctively felt the presence of someone nearby. I felt something sinister looking at me. I felt very cold and scared. Do you know that feeling when you can't move your arm or leg out of fear? Suddenly, an icy hand grabbed my wrist. I didn't see it, but I certainly felt it. Seized with horror, I rushed away, screaming and weaving among the monuments like a hare. I didn't know where my father's funeral was now taking place, and I ran wherever I could. Seeing the edge, and beyond it the fence of the cemetery, I rushed there, stumbling and stumbling. Having got out of the cemetery, I saw my mother, who, judging by her appearance, had been looking for me for a long time. Angry, she ran up to me, but when she saw me tearful and scared to death, she changed her face. She hugged me and told me to be patient and that everything would be fine. Apparently, she decided that the tears on my face and the frightened look were due to the death of my father. If only she knew why I was so scared. But, as it turned out, this something did not leave me even when I found myself outside the cemetery. When we were driving home, I constantly felt his presence next to me. And at home at the wake, I could say I felt his breath on the back of my neck. I was afraid to go to bed, but nevertheless I had to. No matter how I stalled for time, my mother sent my sister and I to bed. My sister Sveta and I slept in the same room. My bed stood on the left wall, opposite the door, and my sister's bed respectively on the right. I went to bed, and, trying not to think about the terrible thoughts that were popping into my head, I fell asleep. I dreamed that I was running along some corridors. Judging by the forks, it was a labyrinth. I'm not just running, I'm running away from someone. It ran after me with a wild roar. Turning around, I saw a huge man with long, tangled hair combed over his face. At one point, he drove me into a dead end. I watched him approach, baring his black teeth. Here, a door appeared to my right. It swung open, and my father was behind it. "Run in, quickly." With these words, he let me through and slammed the door behind me, which immediately disappeared into the wall. My father turned to me. "How did you manage to catch this rubbish?" He didn't have time to say anything else as I happily hugged him. When I calmed down a little, he sat me down on a chair that had appeared from nowhere and told me the following. "What you picked up in the cemetery is the spirit of suicide. And suicide is the most terrible sin a person can commit. A suicide cannot have a funeral service and must be buried behind the cemetery fence." However, his family did not consider it necessary to pay attention to this. They performed a funeral service for him and buried him in the cemetery, which was absolutely impossible to do. Now he is trapped there and cannot serve out his prescribed 1,000 years in hell. Therefore, he decided to finish you off. Through your soon-dead body, he will go to hell and at the same time take you with him. But don't be afraid. As soon as dawn begins, he will disappear. But before that, remember, when you wake up, he will call you. Under no circumstances turn towards the voice, no matter what he tells you. Well, I have to go. I started to cry, but he said, "Don't worry, we'll meet again, I promise. Most importantly, don't forget me and visit my grave. Not often, of course, but once or twice a year is possible so that it doesn't become as unkempt as that poor fellow's. Well, see you, son. I love you. And remember, the main thing is don't turn around." The silhouette of the father became fuzzy as if through cloudy glass. The next moment I found myself in the room. My gaze was fixed on the left wall, close to which my bed stood. I lay there and didn't know whether to believe what I dreamed. I didn't know until the moment I heard what my father warned me about. I was lying facing the wall, and from behind I heard the voice of my sister Sveta calling me by name in a whisper, "Oleg." Hearing the voice of my sister, I was about to turn around, but something, most likely my father's parting words, held me back. Also, despite the familiar voice, there was something in it someone else's. I don't know how to explain it. It seems to be the voice of a sister, and it seems to be not. Oleg. The voice called me even more insistently. What? Turn around. I think something got into my eye, so I still won't see anything in the dark. Turn on the lights. Well, turn around, turn around. I pressed myself even tighter against the wall and did not answer. He called me for another 2 hours. Gradually, the voice became higher pitched, and soon it sounded more like the hoarse bass of a man. I felt very scared. Turn around. He suddenly roared. I don't know about you, but I was so paralyzed by horror that my vision went dark. Soon dawn appeared through the window. The voice is gone. In the morning, I asked my sister if she had called me at night. The answer was predictable. Sveta looked at me in bewilderment and said that I was dreaming. I don't know what it was. Of course, you can say that anyone can dream, but how can you explain that voice? In any case, I am eternally grateful to my father. Perhaps he saved me. From what? I don't know myself.